The cameras kept rolling long after the cheers faded. What once looked like a modern-day American dream, raw talent, stubborn ambition, and a small-town fabricator turning scrap metal into spectacle, began to fracture under the weight of its own success. Bad Chad Customs was never just a television show. It was a pressure cooker, fueled by pride, ego, expectation, and the quiet fear of being exposed. Behind the sparks and steel, behind the viral builds and bold confidence, something darker was forming, something no edit could hide forever. As deadlines tightened and fame magnified every flaw, the man at the center of it all found himself trapped between who he had been and who the world demanded he become. Success promised freedom, yet delivered scrutiny. Passion once brought joy, now laced with exhaustion and resentment. When the show finally disappeared, fans were left with rumors, half-truths, and one haunting question lingering in the silence. Did Bad Chad Customs fall because the system failed him, or because the pressure revealed something that had always been there? This is not the story fans were shown. This is the story beneath the welds, beneath the bravado, beneath the myth. The shop is alive, but not in the way it once was. Fluorescent lights hum overhead, casting a harsh, unforgiving glow across bare metal and unfinished dreams. Sparks burst and die against concrete floors, each one echoing like a countdown. The air smells of oil, sweat, and impatience. Cameras are everywhere now, silent, watching, waiting. On the surface, Bad Chad Customs looks unstoppable. Builds are bigger. Deadlines are tighter. The brand is louder than ever. Yet beneath the noise, something vital is quietly unraveling. Chad moves through the chaos with practiced confidence. His posture is rigid, deliberate, almost defiant. To the outside world, he appears unshaken, a man in full control of his kingdom. But the narrator sees what the cameras cannot linger on for long. The way his jaw tightens when a producer interrupts a build. The brief pause before he answers a question he never asked to be asked. The flicker of irritation that crosses his eyes when the clock on the wall becomes more important than the metal in his hands. What began as passion has become performance. Every weld now carries expectation. Every mistake feels permanent. The shop, once a refuge, has transformed into a stage where instinct must bow to schedule. Chad's identity slowly blurs with the image being sold. A persona sharpened for television, stripped of nuance, rewarded for intensity rather than patience. The thrill of recognition arrives quickly, but it never stays long. Applause fades faster than the pressure that replaces it. Producers push for tension. Viewers demand spectacle. The builds are no longer just machines, they are deadlines with consequences. Creativity is interrupted mid-thought, redirected mid-spark. Chad feels it in his chest first, a low, constant pressure that tightens as the day drags on. He tells himself this is the price of success, that this is what it means to win. But doubt begins to whisper in the spaces between noise, asking questions he doesn't want to answer. Relationships inside the shop strain under the weight of constant observation. Conversations become guarded. Trust erodes quietly, replaced by exhaustion and misinterpretation. Long hours stretch into nights where silence feels heavier than conflict. Chad rarely slows down long enough to notice how isolated he has become, even while surrounded by people. The brand demands everything: time, patience, emotional restraint, and offers validation only in flashes. At night, when the shop finally empties and the cameras power down, the quiet feels unfamiliar. There is no applause here, only the echo of tools settling and the hum of lights cooling off. In these moments, Chad stands alone, staring at half-finished builds that mirror his own uncertainty. The question is no longer whether Bad Chad Customs is succeeding, but whether it is costing something irretrievable. Long before television lights flooded the shop, before deadlines were measured in episodes and not days, Chad learned a quieter lesson. Reliance was dangerous. The roots of Bad Chad Customs stretch back to an upbringing shaped by friction, where authority was rarely gentle and approval was never guaranteed. The world around him did not offer reassurance. It demanded toughness, and toughness, learned early, became armor. The narrator drifts through these early years with a somber understanding. Chad's environment was not designed to nurture softness or patience. Mistakes carried weight. Silence often followed conflict. In that space, independence was not a choice but a necessity. He learned to trust his hands before his words, to solve problems with action rather than conversation. Welding, fabrication, shaping metal, these were not hobbies. They were escapes. Control in a life that offered little of it. There is a psychological edge to this independence. Each successful build became proof of worth. Each completed project a quiet rebuttal to doubt. Yet beneath that confidence lived a deeper fear, the fear of being dismissed, corrected, or constrained. Rules felt like threats. Guidance felt like judgment. Over time, resistance hardened into identity. Chad did not just dislike being told how to do things. He needed to prove that no one else could do them better. The shop, in its earliest form, reflected this mindset. Loud, raw, uncompromising. A place where imperfection was acceptable as long as effort was undeniable. But this same resistance carried a hidden cost. Collaboration became difficult. Reflection felt unnecessary. The narrator observes how success reinforced the belief that defiance was not only justified, but essential. As bad Chad customs began gaining attention, these traits were praised rather than questioned. The very behaviors once formed as defense mechanisms were now rewarded. Conflict was reframed as confidence. Stubbornness as authenticity. Each external validation pushed self-examination further out of reach. Chad did not notice how little room remained for growth, for pause, for recalibration. Moments of doubt still surfaced, usually late at night, when the shop was empty and the echoes of grinders faded. In those moments, the old fears resurfaced. Fear of failure, fear of being exposed as not enough. But instead of addressing them, he buried them deeper beneath work, noise, and motion. Movement felt safer than stillness. The rise happens quickly, almost violently. One moment, Bad Chad Customs is a shop known by a niche audience of builders and rebels. The next, it is a televised symbol of raw American fabrication, broadcast into living rooms far removed from the smell of burning steel. Fame does not arrive gently. It floods the space, rearranging everything it touches. The shop no longer belongs solely to the work. Cameras dictate movement. Lighting rigs hang where tools once rested. Silence becomes rare, replaced by countdowns, retakes, and the low murmur of production staff watching closely. Chad's name is no longer just his. It is a brand spoken by strangers who feel they know him, yet only know the edited version. The narrator senses the shift immediately. Success has erased anonymity, and with it, peace. At first, the attention feels validating. Years of resistance and self-reliance appear justified. Each episode confirms that his instincts were right, that his defiance built something undeniable. But validation is fleeting. Praise arrives tangled with expectation, and expectation quickly hardens into demand. Builds grow more extreme. Timelines compress. The margin for error disappears. Every flaw is magnified, replayed, dissected online by people who will never step inside the shop. Psychological pressure seeps into every corner of Chad's life. The narrator observes the subtle changes. The way his shoulders tense when producers ask for more intensity. The way his patience shortens when creativity is interrupted mid-flow. The show does not simply document conflict. It feeds on it. Frustration becomes content. Exhaustion becomes narrative. Chad feels trapped between preserving his authenticity and fulfilling a role that no longer feels entirely his own. Loneliness settles in quietly. Surrounded by people, yet deeply isolated, Chad struggles to articulate what he is losing. Conversations become transactional. Trust becomes conditional. Relationships strain as the demands of production consume time once reserved for reflection or connection. The shop, once a sanctuary, now feels like contested territory, part workshop, part set, part psychological cage. At night, after filming wraps, Chad often lingers alone among unfinished builds. The machines are silent, but his thoughts are not. The narrator hears the internal conflict clearly. He questions whether the success is sustainable, whether the version of himself on screen is erasing the man beneath it. but admitting that fear feels dangerous. Vulnerability has no place in the persona the show rewards. Public perception tightens the trap. Fans celebrate his defiance, encouraging the very behaviors that are wearing him down. Critics sharpen their words, amplifying every mistake. Chad begins to feel as though he is constantly on trial, performing strength to avoid being dismantled. Rest feels undeserved. Slowing down feels like surrender. The pace accelerates. Episodes stack. Pressure compounds. Creativity gives way to survival. Each day becomes less about building something meaningful and more about enduring the next deadline. The narrator senses the turning point approaching, not as a single dramatic moment, but as a gradual erosion. Confidence remains outwardly intact, but inside, something essential is thinning. Pressure no longer arrives in waves. It is constant, unrelenting, woven into every hour of the day. The shop feels tighter now, walls closing in despite the open space. Sounds are sharper. Voices carry an edge. Even the familiar scream of grinders feels accusatory. What was once controlled chaos has become something more volatile, charged with frustration and fatigue. Chad's temper shortens, not from cruelty, but from depletion. The narrator sees it in the way he moves, faster, harsher, less patient with imperfection. Mistakes that once invited problem-solving now ignite confrontation. Every delay feels personal. Every question feels like doubt. Pride steps in where reflection should be, shielding him from admitting how close he is to the edge. Behind the scenes, tension thickens. Production demands escalate as deadlines tighten beyond reason. Conflict is no longer incidental, it is expected. Arguments are reframed as drama. Exhaustion is treated as fuel. Chad senses the shift but feels powerless to stop it. The show no longer follows his rhythm. He is chasing its momentum, always one step behind, always reacting. The narrator reveals the psychological fracture widening inside him. Fear mutates into defensiveness. Guilt simmers beneath anger. Guilt over strained relationships, over people pushed away, over moments missed in the pursuit of something that promised fulfillment, but now delivers only pressure. Yet accountability feels dangerous. To slow down would be to admit weakness, and weakness feels like collapse. The shop transforms into a courtroom. Every decision is judged. Every reaction is captured. Chad's sense of control erodes as his identity remains welded to the show's survival. He cannot separate personal failure from professional criticism. The two merge into a single, crushing weight. Sleep becomes restless. Silence becomes unbearable. Then comes the uncertainty. The conversations whispered behind closed doors. The schedules that suddenly feel tentative. The future of the show is no longer guaranteed. Chad feels it before it is spoken aloud. The narrator lingers on his expression in these moments. A mix of disbelief and quiet dread. This was supposed to be the reward. This was supposed to last. When the show ends, it does not do so with ceremony. There is no final build, no closure, no explanation that feels complete. It simply stops. The cameras disappear. The phones go quiet. The shop remains, but it feels hollowed out, stripped of meaning by absence. What once overwhelmed him now leaves a different kind of ache, silence where noise once lived. Fans speculate. Rumors circulate. Partial truths collide online. Chad watches from a distance, unable to correct the narrative without confronting himself. The narrator understands the cruelty of this phase, not the loss of fame but the loss of voice. He is left alone with unfinished thoughts and unresolved damage, forced to face what distraction once kept hidden. The silence after collapse is not peaceful. It is invasive. It settles into corners, lingers in the air, presses against the chest. Without cameras, without deadlines barking orders, the shop feels unfamiliar. Larger, emptier, stripped of urgency. The tools remain where they always were, but they no longer dictate movement. For the first time in years, nothing is demanding a performance. Chad moves more slowly now. There is no audience to project strength for, no producer waiting to escalate tension. The narrator observes how the absence of noise forces reflection. Every mistake once drowned out by momentum now resurfaces in memory. Conversations replay, moments of anger sharpen, opportunities for restraint missed. The reckoning is quiet, but relentless. Fear changes shape in this phase. It is no longer fear of failure under public scrutiny, but fear of irrelevance, of having given everything to something that may no longer define him. Without the show, Chad confronts a hollow question he had postponed for years. Who is he when no one is watching? The brand once offered identity, structure, purpose. Now it offers only echoes. Regret arrives unevenly, not as a dramatic confession, but as small, accumulating realizations. Relationships that could have been protected. Words that could have been softened. Moments where pride overpowered patience. The narrator does not absolve him, nor does it condemn. It simply reveals the cost of living in constant resistance, of confusing strength with refusal to bend. Yet beneath the weight of reflection, something else stirs. An unfamiliar stillness that allows space for understanding. Chad begins to recognize that the fire which drove him was never entirely destructive. It forged skill, resilience, vision. But unchecked, it consumed balance. The difference now is awareness. The slow acknowledgement that survival alone is not purpose. The shop starts to change again, subtly. Not in spectacle, but in intention. Builds return to being personal, imperfect, unfilmed. Work becomes quieter, more deliberate. There is no promise of redemption arc, no guarantee of comeback. The narrator emphasizes this restraint. Growth in this phase is not loud. It does not demand validation. Legacy becomes the unspoken presence in every decision. Not the legacy shaped by ratings or online debates, but the one formed in private, how work is approached, how conflict is handled, how identity is carried forward. Chad understands now that fame distorted the story, but it did not erase responsibility. What remains is choice,